And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another tremendous installment from very high above all the insipid and puerile forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Friday, August 28th. Today is the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. A truly tremendous day. And it was the first time that you had a gathering that big on that type of issue. At no time before would you have seen, a large group of African Americans, and we're talking, in the midst of segregation, the Jim Crow South, you wouldn't have seen that many African Americans on the National Mall, and it was extraordinary that Martin Luther King Jr. himself had the courage to stand up on the steps and give a speech. I mean, this was way before the time of all the advanced technology that we have now, what the Secret Service is able to do, locate people and, high-powered optics and all of that, just to be able to spot, any threat. But he did it, and it went off without a hitch. And so today is the anniversary of 8/28, every year when this comes around, I try to find I do find a video of that speech. And so on today's program, we're going to listen to a little bit of that, a little bit of the beginning of his speech and a little bit of the end of his speech. So we're going to do that. And of course, today it's Open Line Friday. That's right, my friends. It is Open Line Friday on Cowboy State Politics. This is the day where we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Whatever's been on your mind's been brewing, stewing in the back of your noggin. Go ahead and give me a call. The phone number is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. That's the number that'll get you right here to me. So whatever you've been stewing on all week long, this is your chance. Just give me a call, and we'll talk about it. And you see, normally during the week, if I have the phone lines open, you kind of have to talk about what I want to talk about, but not so on Friday. On Friday, we just open it up, open the gates of the corral, and just let everybody out. So anyway, that's what we're doing today, Open Line Friday. And again, that phone number is 307-374-8989. As I mentioned, today is 8/28, and you know what? I want to start there. So Martin Luther King Jr. on August 28th, a really long time ago, stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and gave what every school child knows is his I Have a Dream speech. And it, Martin Luther King Jr. himself was kind of a controversial figure. He had some alliances with some people that, probably now we might We might not think we're too great of people. But even so, and this is the thing you learn when you study history, is that sometimes the people you think are heroes turn out to be villains. And sometimes the villains that you were taught were really terrible people. Sometimes they turn out to be heroes. But what you'll find is the influential folks in history have a little bit of both. And it is probably that combination between the two that makes them as effective as they are. And, again, look at a good example, I guess, is our founding fathers. Brilliant men wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Just came up with the whole idea of this amazing American system. Well, a lot of them were slave owners. Okay. Well, first, you have to judge that in the times in which they lived. But second, you have to take into consideration, okay, so that was not a good thing. They also did some really amazing things, and such is the case with Martin Luther King Jr. So here is the beginning of his speech. Let's see here. And like I said, we'll listen to a little bit of the beginning, and I'm going to play for you a little bit of the end because they're both pretty incredible. But here's how he began his speech on the Lincoln Memorial.
As the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And
so you'll notice in the beginning of his speech, he continually, he has the same cadence and the same pattern throughout the entire speech. And he begins it by 100 years ago. And he repeats it over and over. And the beginning of his speech, he's looking to the past. And by the way, in terms of speech writing, this one's a doozy. It really is a well-written speech. And I don't think that anybody other than him probably could have delivered it. And certainly we wouldn't have remembered it. So beginning of his speech, he's talking about the past 100 years ago. Now, listen to the end of his speech. It's very much the same pattern. But now, instead of looking at the past, he's looking to the future.
Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Now, isn't that always the challenge? Isn't it still the challenge today that we are facing? That we should not judge people based on how they look or the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And it seems as if the American left has not changed since 1965, since Martin Luther King Jr. Delivered his speech. It seems that they really haven't changed their methods at all. It is still trying to identify people based on what they look like, what their last name is, what color their skin is, and the ridiculous part of it is that we have stretched it all the way of what they do in the bedroom, as if that's anybody's business but their own. The truth is, my friends, that the American left, which by the way, there's a lot of historians that say that Martin Luther King Jr. was a very liberal guy. You heard at the beginning of his speech where he talked about, the American Negro lives in poverty while we live in the vast sea of prosperity. So, it's the same themes over and over. And if you'll notice today, we still fight the same, we still fight against the same challenges, that we should live in a meritocracy. Everything about this country says and screams meritocracy, and yet too often we judge people by how they look, what color their skin is, what gender they are, or now apparently we have to judge people on what they do in the bedroom. Charlie Cole says Martin Luther King Jr. would be very disappointed to see the racialism he detested applied to civics and politics today. Well said, Mr. Cole. I think he would be very disappointed because everything and I shouldn't say everything, but it feels like everything is reduced down to essentialism. What I mean by that is everything is reduced to the lowest common denominator, and the left always chooses race. Given the chance, they'll choose a class struggle or anything that separates one group from another. But the pattern is all the same. And this is the point here. And I think, in my personal opinion, this is the essential thing that we should remember about Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, is that there are 2 ways that you can look at the world. One is the one that the left uses all the time, that they want you to believe that we live in a manichaeistic society, that there are 2 groups, that there are oppressors and then there are the oppressed. And that is how our country is set up, that there's always one group oppressing another. Now, there's another vision of our country. This is the one that I think is absolutely true, is that we live in a nation where everybody has the equal opportunity to succeed. That the guarantee of America is not that you'll have equal outcomes, it's that you have a chance. Albeit sometimes it's a fighting chance to succeed, but everybody has the same equal opportunity to succeed, and it is up to the individual how hard they're going to work, how hard they're going to fight, what they're willing to do to succeed. But here, you have a chance. And while there are people that would like to reduce our country to one of racism or sexism or we name the ism, none of those things are actually true. And if you go back to the promise of America, what the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence say, we live in, not to use a cliche, but we live in a land of opportunity, in a land where you can be whomever you want to be. It's just a matter of your ambition and how hard you're willing to work and what you are willing to do. I mean, there are so many stories in America of people who grew up in abject poverty without anything to their name, and they decided that they wanted to make something of themselves, and so they worked hard. They went to school. They perfected their craft, and then in the end, they succeeded. But it is only in America where you can do that. And it is truly an amazing place, my friends. And we have to resist the temptation of agreeing with the American left that you're not in charge of your destiny, that you aren't in charge of how your life turns out. The truth is, you are, my friends, that you are the arbiter of what happens in your life. And if you apply yourself, if you work hard, if you sacrifice, if you're willing to put your nose to the grindstone, then you can succeed. Don't listen to the people on the left that tell you that just because you're black or just because you're Hispanic or just because you're a woman or just because you're gay or whatever that you can't succeed. That's not true at all. The truth is, you live in America, and you are, by virtue of you just living here, you are you have a far greater opportunity than anyone else on the planet. So, my friends, today, 8/28, if you get some time, go look up the Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, and just watch the whole thing. It's incredible. So let's see here. Linda says looked it up. Apparently, the "I Have a Dream" speech was written primarily by Martin Luther King Jr. himself, with his advisors, speechwriters Clarence Jones and Stanley Levinson. Makes sense. I figured he probably wrote it himself. So thanks a lot, Linda. Okay, let's get to the news. Oh, by the way, if you want to comment on Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech or on anything else today, remember, it's Open Line Friday. Let me put the number back up there again so you've got it. And the number here in the studio is 307-374-8989. Just go ahead and give me a call. So Gordon is big mad. Big, huge mad. And, he's mad definitely at Trump and definitely at the Department of Justice for sending election observers to check out Wyoming's elections. From the cow pie, Gordon is shocked, I tell you, at federal agents monitoring the Wyoming election. He sends his concerns to the Attorney General, Keith Couts, as if Couts is going to do anything about it. Anyway, and I quote, Governor Mark Gordon said reports of aggressive behavior by federal election monitors at polling places in Cheyenne last Tuesday have left him shocked, I tell you. He alerted the Wyoming Attorney General, but said it's too early to know if litigation is in order. So wait a minute. The governor is talking about suing the federal government over sending election observers to see what's happening in Wyoming. Now, why would he do that? Why would it be such a big deal? Well, I mean, I guess technically, the Constitution leaves the elections up to the states. So there's that. The federal government can't tell a state how to run their election. But it doesn't say anything about watching the election. Anybody can go in and observe an election. That's why we have poll watchers. Granted, they can't interfere, can't really talk to anybody, but you can sign up to be a poll watcher in pretty much any county you want and go watch the election happen. Gordon has referred his concerns, and this is the, and I'm not kidding you, this is the grammar from the cow pie. Gordon has referred his concerns about the federal poll watchers' behavior to the Wyoming Attorney General's office for further review, he said. Quote, it's a little bit early to think about litigation, said Gordon in a Tuesday phone interview. I want to kind of get to the bottom of what I understood some of the disruptions might have been and get a better sense of what really happened. Gordon said he found it irregular that the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security Director Lynn Budd said during, okay, so let's try this paragraph one more time. Gordon said he found it irregular that Wyoming Office of Homeland Security Director Lynn Budd said, so he found it irregular that the director said that during a briefing on the election security and rollout, that she hadn't heard about the federal operation before it happened. Wow, what a sentence. Anyway, which was a surprise, Gordon said, because normally whenever we conduct an election, it's pretty much all hands on deck. As for the federal agents visiting, by Gordon's count, at least 6 of the Laramie County's 7 polling stations, we were delighted to let them participate as observers, said the governor. But as monitors in quotation mark, as per Wyoming state law, they weren't allowed to go interview voters. They weren't allowed to check the tabulators, Gordon said. Those are the sorts of things that could potentially put the election at risk. The governor questioned why, if the federal government had concerns about the election, its agents didn't ask those before the busy election operation. So anyway, you have federal monitors checking out the election and how it was conducted. Now, why is that? Well, because in the last election, there were a lot of shenanigans, and let's not even dredge up 2020 again. But the Trump administration is very concerned with how elections are conducted, and across the country. There were, and maybe Wyoming is an exception to this, but across the country, there were all sorts of election irregularities that cropped up during the 2024 election, and definitely during the 2020 election. So it stands to reason why the DOJ might be interested. It's nothing, and again, it's an election. It's the midterms. It's an important election. And there have been reports from across the country of different polling locations being conducted outside of the color of law. So it makes sense, I think, to have people observe the election. Now, should they be able to interfere? No. Can federal officials monkey around with a tabulation machine? No. Because all of those are run by the state. So you have a real, I guess you would call it a separation of powers problem here if they did anything other than observe. Now, the Cowboy goes on for about, their typical 6 or 7 pages. Let's see here. So the DOJ's email to the Cowboy includes a quote by Darren Smith. It's a quotation, not a quote. Anyway, voters deserve absolute confidence that their ballots are secure and their voices are heard without interference, said Smith in the email. The DOJ worked alongside local officials to ensure every lawful vote was protected. We do not comment on the internal operation timelines, but the deployment was fully aligned with our stated mission to protect the vote. Now, the question is, has Wyoming had problems with our elections in the past? Well, I don't think, broad strokes, I don't think that we have. However, we did have the whole Weston County debacle. That was a big mess. In this election, there were several counties that didn't exactly certify their tabulation machines. And there are some questions as to how the hand count audits are going to be conducted. So, are there questions? Yeah. Should we observe and see how elections are run? Yes, but federal officials can't interfere. That's in the Constitution. So let's see here. So anyway, the long and the short of it is, Gordon's just mad and he's on his way out. And I really think this is just another attempt to get headlines because, as far as I know, there wasn't any election shenanigans that anybody saw. So anyway, Gordon's mad, and that's about the size of it. So, all right, so it's a little bit early. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to tell you about this. I talked to Rebecca last night, and she said that really she had a couple meetings this morning, and so we're going to postpone her interview until Monday or until Tuesday. And so we'll have her. And Cowboy State Politics is going to have the first interview with Rebecca before any of the other media. So that'll be great. And we'll talk to her on the next program. Sorry, it's not today. She had a late night election announcement, and we'll probably see some of that in the media today. So anyway, there's that. Let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Appropriations Committee that met yesterday. The Wyoming Business Council, again in the news, as they always should be. So when we come back, I've got some sound bites from it. It's more of the same, my friends, but we'll talk about it. The calendar says that it's summer, and you'll believe it. Oh, that's just so cute. But you obviously haven't lived here very long, have you? And you probably think that the weather is just going to continue to warm up. You don't have to worry about snow or ice or 30-degree temperatures anymore. In case you've forgotten, this is Wyoming, my friend, and that sort of thinking doesn't work here. 1 minute, it could be 75 and sunny, and 10 minutes later, snow. Whatever the weather, you need a pair of socks that'll keep your feet cool and dry even on the hottest of summer days. And if you happen to run into that freak midsummer snowstorm, trust me, it's happened. I've seen it. You'll stay nice and toasty warm. Well, your feet anyway. To get you a pair, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. These are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia,
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell. Iceland.
France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the last year and a half been more than you could bear? Well, if it has, you've come to the right place. Call my friend Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. It's Open Line Friday after a busy broadcast week. If you want to be part of the show, the phone number here in the studio is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. Did you watch the eclipse last night? It was a total solar eclipse. So I always get the two mixed up, solar or lunar. Anyway, the moon was covered up for a while. I would have gotten all about it had dear old dad not sent me a text message and said, hey, there's an eclipse outside. So I was able to get a couple of what I think are pretty cool pictures from using my camera from the back porch. And let's see here. Let me just show you this one. I think this is by far my favorite, even though it's a little bit fuzzy, but check this out. I think it's a pretty cool picture. You can see the clouds down here. And like I say, it's a little bit fuzzy, but pretty cool picture. I've got some others. I just liked the clouds. And then, during the eclipse, the cloud cover was terrible. And so I'd get a little glimpse of it, and then a cloud would move in, and I'd have to wait. And then the clouds would move, and you could see the moon again. So pretty cool. I've always been interested in astronomy. When I was in high school, the in Buffalo, and it wasn't the high school, it was the middle school, that owned a 16-inch Celestron telescope, and they never used it. And so my physics professor slash I had an independent study of theoretical physics with him, and no kidding, actually did. And so I said to him one day, hey, why don't we go down to the grade school and see if we can get the telescope? And so we did. And for my entire senior year, I had a 16-inch Celestron telescope mounted in the back of my Blazer. And I wish I still had some of the pictures that we took with it, but every time there was a comet that came through, or we did photograph some nebulae. I'm not exactly sure what the plural is there, but anyway, always been fascinated with astronomy. At our cabin, we've got a smaller Celestron telescope, but it's a 4-inch. Still, you can see the rings of Saturn pretty clear, which you can, if you know where to look, you can kind of see those with a pair of binoculars. But anyway, cool. The eclipse was cool last night, and thanks to dear old Dad, I didn't forget about it. Okay, so the Appropriations Committee was meeting yesterday, and wouldn't you know, one thing was on the agenda, and this one is going to continue to be on the agenda for the next 2 years, even though the Redcoats are going to straight up fund this thing to the hilt. What am I talking about?
The free market as an ideal, unfortunately, it doesn't exist except at, maybe those ivory tower type institutions that we might call as in academia, and that's where it exists because it's a model. It's not about having a super small government. It's having an appropriately sized government that's important. And for the problem that we're looking to solve, we're not appropriately sized. We are indeed too small.
Yeah, government is too
The free market is actually not free, but you have to remember those markets are working.
Okay,
the market is working against us. So we have to use government intervention to actually reverse that. I know all of you.
Yeah,
there will likely need to be, there will need to be government interventions if we wish Wyoming to compete in the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
And that's the perspective that we have. And we do have a few of those interventions, and as palatable or as needing Benadryl as they might be to some of us, they're necessary if we want to compete with the other states. Okay,
so that's Josh Durrell, the head of the Wyoming Business Council. I've played those sound bites for you about 100 times, maybe more. And he's a guy that believes that you cannot succeed without government, that there's no way that this state can compete without government. Government, and you heard him say, government is too small. Oh, my God. Well, in the Appropriations Committee yesterday, the Wyoming Business Council was on tap again. This is from the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, and I quote, state lawmakers considered bills Thursday that would repeal or amend certain Wyoming Business Council programs, continuing their efforts to reform or dismantle one of the Economic Development Agency's core functions. The Wyoming Legislature's Joint Appropriations Committee discussed 3 bills. One to eliminate certain Wyoming Business Council programs, another to amend those programs, and a third to reinstate the county-wide consensus program as a replacement for the Wyoming Business Council's Business Ready Community Grant and Loan Program. The most recent budget cycle reduced their biennial budget from $54.6 million to $15 million. The Wyoming Freedom Caucus members were among the most vocal supporters of the cuts and characterized the Wyoming Business Council as an inappropriate use of taxpayer dollars. It's more than that. The Business Council, that is not the role of government. It is not government's job to get involved with private enterprise and try to spur things on. But we hear that all the time, just about in every single community. You have one agency or another that their stated goal is business development. So first, business is private, right? Government is not a business, even though in Wyoming, they're the number one employer in the state. And as a percentage of GDP, government is the largest industry in Wyoming. And that's kind of a misnomer because by its very nature, government can't be an industry. When that happens, you end up with all sorts of disastrous outcomes, like actually driving out business. And how that happens is you get a group like the Wyoming Business Council, and they say, hey, you know what? This business over here is a really great idea. We're going to give taxpayer dollars to it. And so they'll have capital on which to operate. All the while, that business's competition over here, he doesn't get any of that money. He doesn't get any help from taxpayers. And he has to compete with somebody who has virtually an unlimited checking account. And so, it's not government's place. It's not their role. In fact, it's disastrous. It's counterproductive to what business actually does. And yet every community in the state has some form or another of government business development. And usually it takes the form of the so-called Chamber of Commerce. Really, it's a chamber of communists. They're government funded. The chamber every year in Sheridan, and I'm sure it's the same way in just about every other community. The Chamber of Commerce, that is the group that businesses get together in an effort to, spur economic development. So it's supposed to be a private group of all these businesses going together to help out private business. They get together. But instead, in Wyoming, the Chamber of Communists, they go to the city and request taxpayer dollars. They go to the county and they request taxpayer dollars. And so it doesn't become a chamber of business anymore. It becomes a chamber of government, which is exactly what it has become. So the Freedom Caucus members maintain the criticism that the entity distorts free market competition by picking winners and losers. It absolutely does. That's the whole purpose of it. Several members of the far-right coalition in the State House of Representatives, and by the way, have you noticed that we're back to that? For a while, the Wyoming media, the cow pie and the turkey vulture, they kind of drifted away from this whole right-wing extremism, far-right people. No, we're back to it. And the media is nothing if not predictable. And I can see it as if it were as plain as a map what they're going to do. And that is, they're going to take a giant leap to the left, and we're going to be right back to the far right legislators, the right-wing extremists. And it's a broken record. They can't figure out anything. Anyway, so picking winners and losers, several members of the far-right coalition in the House of Representatives, including some on the Joint Appropriations Committee, lost their re-election bids. Okay. Let's see here. Salazar said, it's my intent with regard to the economic development proposed legislation not to vote on any of these bills today, he said. The first bill that the committee discussed would eliminate 15 Wyoming Business Council programs, including the broadband funding program. Why are we funding broadband? Now, the argument for it is, well, schools have and people have to have access to the internet, as if they don't already. Now, I will admit that there are places in Wyoming, probably, one of those out where Linda lives, that there is no broadband access. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other alternatives. And why the heck is it the government's job to make sure that you can access the internet? That's your job. Now, there are some arguments to say that, well, internet access, that's really infrastructure now. I don't know that it is. But I suppose if you made an argument to say, well, it's necessary to do education, to operate, right? It's not as essential as running water or sewer system. Yet still, there are a lot of communities in Wyoming that they don't, or a lot of places in Wyoming they don't have access to a sewer. A lot of ranches don't. A lot of trailer parks don't. A lot of developments right outside of town don't. They're all on a septic system. Now, I would say having water and sewer probably more essential than the internet. But anyway, I mean, I really don't think that this is the job of government. Anyway, the Brownfield Revolving Loan Program, the Workforce Housing and Infrastructure Program, and the Kickstart Grant Program. So the housing and infrastructure. You don't have a right to have a house over your head. That's your job. That's not the government's job, and it is not essential infrastructure. You see, the only thing that the government, like if we could agree, which you're never going to convince me of this, but if we could agree that the Business Council had some role and maybe one of their jobs was to improve infrastructure, then maybe we might be able to get with this, agree with this. But housing, nope. That's not the government's job. It's your job. You don't have a right to live in an expensive community. And if you can't afford the community that you live in, you need to move elsewhere. That's your job. So in theory, you take a job that is going to be able to pay your expenses and you can make a little bit of extra money, right? There's no guarantee that you get to live in Jackson or Sheridan or Casper or Cheyenne. You need to decide what your means are, and then you need to live inside them. That's not the role of government, and yet the Wyoming Business Council is getting involved with so-called affordable housing, which, by the way, it never ends up being affordable for the taxpayer. And what we've discovered through multiple investigations is this so-called affordable housing statewide is the biggest scam that I think I've heard of in Wyoming. Millions of your dollars going towards building housing complexes that end up being owned by East Coast equity firms. That's not in any way the job of the government, nor should it be. And then the Kickstart grant program, that's the one where about a year ago they were running a Facebook campaign, and they literally admitted that they were going to pick winners and losers. It was a contest. You submit a business plan, what you want to do, and other people are going to submit a business plan. And the business council is going to choose which one of them is the best idea, and then they're going to give taxpayer dollars to that business. It literally was picking winners and losers. Well, during the meeting, our pal, since it's been so long since we've talked to Agent 29, I figured I'd play a little bit of his amendment. And he makes a really good argument here about why we should eliminate this particular part of the Wyoming Business Council. Check this out.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Individuals. Anything? Appreciate all of you taking the time. Thank you very much. Other public comment or anyone online? Any other comments? Then I will close public comment. Committee, LSO went through the bill. You've had it with you for a while. Any changes, any amendments to, yes, Representative Pendergraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we add the business-ready communities to the list of programs to delete from the Business Council. And if I have a second, I will explain my reasoning.
Second is given a second. You have a second. Go ahead.
Thank you. There's definitely a need here. That is not in question. And we've talked about and heard very favorable response to the idea of the community consensus procedure. Given the choice between the two, I would definitely go with the community consensus for a couple of reasons.
Listen to him here.
One of it is that it makes decisions local, rather than having a central board at the business council make determinations for each of these communities, each of these counties. They can do so individually. I would remind folks that we've heard all kinds of testimony about the great need that is here. Frankly, it's more money than we've got. And so we need to do the very best that we can with the monies that we have. And if you have two programs basically doing the same sort of thing, then you've doubled the overhead, you've diminished the amount of the effective dollars put into it. And so I would say that I would move that community, the business-ready communities, onto the list to be repealed, and that we focus more on the community consensus program and allowing local governments to determine their own destiny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the motion, I'm going to speak against it, just because my understanding is that the community or the county consensus funds really are meant to address maintenance of existing infrastructure. So to take care of what we already have, which is essential. That's a building block. Whereas the BRC program is meant for growth. It's meant for new infrastructure, new opportunity, for business expansion, so that there are distinguished, there's differences between these two programs, and it's not one or the other, it's both and. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be voting for this amendment. I think it is prudent, and I'll address the previous comments of my colleague that, I don't think that the community consensus grants are limited to simply maintenance, but when communities can decide, I think it addresses what we heard today in our testimony, that businesses or communities have to be ready for businesses. And if their lack of maintenance makes them incapable of receiving new businesses, then they'll be able to make those decisions with those funds. And if they are beyond the situation where they're just maintaining what they have, they'll be able to use those funds to grow.
All right. So the difference here on this committee is you have people who actually have owned and operated businesses, and you have people that don't have the first clue what it's like to write a paycheck. None of them do. So, for example, John Bear, he owned a laundry, and I think he owned a couple of other businesses. Ken has owned his own carpentry business for a long time, and he worked for another carpenter. On the other side, Bill Alaman, he's got an oil field service gig. So you have people on the committee that are business people, that understand business, what is required to keep a business operating. And then you have, and Abby Angelos, her husband, she and her husband own a precision firearms business over in Gillette. They do great work, by the way. So you have actual business people, and you have folks who are not business people and are government types, ergo Trey Sherwood. So there's two competing ideas of how business ought to operate, one of which thinks that business has to operate with government, that you have to have government involvement, and if you don't, then you're not going to be able to compete. Now, the truth is, their argument is, in a way, is actually true. Because if government is interfering in the free market, that is, if the Wyoming Business Council is giving money to business A and they don't give it to business B is not going to be able to compete with business A because they can't compete with somebody with an unlimited checkbook. I mean, so the liberals, the folks in favor of the Business Council, Josh Durrell, they're trying to set up a situation where they become indispensable. That is, well, these businesses can't compete unless we're the ones, we help them. Well, you're the ones that made it impossible for them to compete in the very first place. I mean, it is screwing up the system and then attempting to be the solution to their screw up. I mean, it is as backward as could possibly be. But I can tell you, you heard Christian, not in that soundbite or in that video segment, but Salazar said that they're not going to vote on any of those bills because they know that in a couple of months, the legislature is going to turn over and it'll just get voted down anyway. So that's probably the reason why he didn't. So let's see here. Back to the turkey vulture. Recommendations for which programs should be limited come from lawmakers who assessed the program's utility and impact. The Wyoming Business Council agreed with recommendations to eliminate some funds and disagreed concerning others, such as the startup program. Of course they did. Some programs overlap with current federal funding. The broadband funding program was one example, which lawmakers argue made the fund redundant. So, in other words, you have federal dollars that are to expand broadband access. And then you have another Wyoming program that does the same thing. Let me give you another example of this. You remember the 988 hotline? And we have to have a 988 hotline, and people in Wyoming have to be able to call when they're having suicidal thoughts. I absolutely agree. I think that program, having a program like that, is necessary. But what none of the advocates told you is that the 988 hotline already existed. They just wanted a Wyoming version of it. So you already had a 988 hotline to where if you were having problems, you could call in and have somebody to talk to. The only really valid, and I don't even think it's valid, but the only argument that kind of made sense was that, we needed someone where you could talk to somebody from Wyoming. It's only Wyoming people, Wyoming solutions for Wyoming problems, that whole gig. But the truth is, we spent tens of millions of dollars, and that program already existed. The same thing holds true with this broadband access program. There's already a federal program to expand it. We don't need our own version of it. But that's what we constantly do, and that's what the Appropriations Committee is trying to eliminate, is that we have duplicative programs across the depth and breadth of government that, we're paying for it with tax dollars on one end, and we're paying for another one with tax dollars on the other end. And it just doesn't make any sense. But when you live in the world of government and you are, like Mr. Josh Durrell and doesn't believe that the free market actually works, well, then I guess maybe in some strange way that makes sense, but it certainly doesn't to me. The committee requested a draft bill that included two amendments, one of which would add the Business Ready Community Grant Program and the loan program to the list of programs to be eliminated, and another that would remove the Wyoming Partnership Challenge Loan Program. There was a comparable bill discussed in the Minerals Committee. Some programs with unexpended and unobligated balances remaining July 1st of 2027 would revert those funds back to the state's general fund. The next bill the committee discussed concerned potential amendments to that program. Kind of already went over that. And the Community Consensus Funding Program. This one's interesting because this is the duplicative one to the Business Ready communities. You see, you have the Wyoming Grants Office and you have the Wyoming Business Council. And in many cases, they do the same thing. The only difference is one of them has a pretty small amount of overhead, and the other one is this ever-increasing and expanding behemoth known as the Wyoming Business Council. But you got two different offices pretty much doing the same thing. It doesn't make sense to have both of them. Let's see here. All right, well, that pretty much does it for that. I'm pretty much tired of talking about the Wyoming Business Council because, in the next legislative session, we're going to have to deal with this like over and over and over, and it's never going to end. And get ready, ladies and gentlemen, because the pig trough is about to be pulled out again, and the amount of money that's going to be dumped into it is going to be truly incredible. And how do we know that? Because they campaigned on it. There are a lot of people on the left. Well, we have to have the Wyoming Business Council. We have to support local business. And okay, so a bunch of people campaigned on, and what you campaigned on, how you acted during the primary, most of the time that's how you're going to vote. And so I don't think it should shock anyone what's going to happen in the next legislative session. So let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, there's a Florida sheriff who says he can't solve crime without flock cameras. Yeah, I don't know how they did it before, but now that we've got flock cameras, we just can't solve crime without them. Well, there's some people that disagree with that. So we'll cover that when we get back. Are you sick to death of being told what to think? Maybe you don't even realize that it's happening. Freedom Caucus bad, big spending, big government, liberal, Republican good. Conservatives are bad and they want to starve little children. I have heard it all, my friends. We are way past the time when the news was just the news, if it ever was. But wouldn't it be nice if you had a news platform that was at least honest about what they were telling you? News on the news page, opinion on the opinion page. That's exactly what the Open Range Record is. Go to the website, openrangerecord.com. News, analysis, opinion, and investigative journalism. One more time, that website is openrangerecord.com. You can listen and watch Cowboy State Politics live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble every Tuesday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pay attention to all that other block-headed, Borg-like so-called news if you want. But if you want to get the real story, watch Cowboy State Politics live. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. It's Open Line Friday. If you want to be part of the show, the phone number here in the studio is 307-374-8989, 307-374-8989. In Florida, a sheriff is dismissing the flock camera concerns, and there are a lot of them, as ignorance and misinformation. And he has compared the deflock efforts to the defund the police. Now, how is it that police solved crime before the advent of so-called flock cameras? Well, they were notified of a crime or discovered one, and then they would investigate. And then they would go arrest the offender and then haul him into court. That's how crime fighting usually works, and it's how it's supposed to work. In America, you have the presumption of innocence. You're presumed innocent before you are proven guilty. And the government doesn't get to go on a fishing expedition and look through everything that you've done to find out if you committed a crime or not. There's been several Supreme Court cases. One of my favorite ones is, and this has been a while ago, 80s, early 90s, where a police department was using an infrared camera, and they would point it at houses to find out which one of them had a giant amount of heat in it, and then they would go bust them for growing marijuana. Well, the Supreme Court ruled that you can't do that. That unless you have probable cause, you cannot go look through somebody's window. In fact, the Supreme Court likened the use of that camera to peering in somebody's window. You don't get to do that. You don't get to surveil citizens without probable cause. And yet we have flock cameras. And the workaround here is that, excuse me, is that the flock cameras are owned by a private company called Flock. And they go to cities and they say, hey, we'll put up these cameras and, they can read license plates and, we can just surveil and it'll be great. When a crime is committed, we'll be able to track people and it'll be fantastic. But we promise we won't give that information to law enforcement. Do you believe that? You shouldn't, because there have been lots of instances where police departments, not police in general, but individual officers have used the flock cameras to stalk their significant other. When they get dumped, they've used the flock cameras to stalk their ex. And so where there is a potential for abuse, generally you will find abuse. And it's just because, people are people, and sometimes people are stupid, that if there is that potential to abuse a technology, it will be abused. And, we have to be, and here's the balance. We want to be able to solve crime. Okay. We want to bring offenders to justice. But on the other hand, on the other side of that, we have to protect everyone's constitutional rights. That the police do not get to go on a fishing expedition in your life to determine, where you may have run a red light or where you may have, been a little bit heavy on the gas pedal. They don't get to do that, right? That you have to be caught committing a crime before you can be prosecuted. Well, this sheriff in Florida, he says that without flock cameras, we can't solve crime at all. And I quote from Breitbart. A Florida sheriff dismissed growing concerns over flock cameras in his community as ignorance, asserting that the AI-powered automated license plate readers are essential to help solve crimes, and compared efforts to deflock the community to cities who want to defund the police. St. Johns County Sheriff Robert Hardwick, he is going to rue the day that he decided to go on camera and say all this stupid crap. But he spoke to 904 Now on August 14th about the emergence of flock cameras, which are said to act only as automatic license plate readers. In his jurisdiction, that reportedly has roughly 180 of these cameras in operation. Maps show some exits having 4 in one small area alone. Accessed across this great state of Florida, here in St. Johns County, we're not hearing the rhetoric that the rest of the country is actually preaching, Hardwick said. Matter of fact, we're not really hearing the rhetoric across the great state of Florida because of our support and leadership involving Lieutenant Governor from the Capitol in Tallahassee. Hardwick dismissed the concerns over mass surveillance as the flavor of the day that will eventually die down. He also tied concerns over flock cameras and the want to remove them to efforts in Democrat-run cities to actively seek to defund the police. And here's what he said. Listen, we hold our people accountable in the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. We had license plate reader technology, not just flock, since 2017. Oh, so you've been surveilling your citizens since 2017. Thanks for the tip, Sheriff. When I came on as sheriff, it's on steroids now, too, as well, because I do not want to be that community that cannot solve crime, he said, defending the additional surveillance and dismissing critics as ignorant. Quote, a little bit of it is ignorance and misinformation of what it truly is. Uh-huh. Right. So, let's see here. Great comment from Linda before I show you this video. And let me just put this on the screen here. So Linda says, I contend that if you're in public, you have no expectation of privacy. You're right, Linda, you do not. Now, if the camera is taking a picture through your windshield, yes, that's an invasion of your privacy, your private property. And so when you go in public, you do not have an expectation of privacy. That is, there's probably numerous cameras that are, viewing you walking through, the town square or whatever. But here's the thing with license plate readers and with these flock cameras, a lot of the surveillance is, watching people, their daily habits. And here's what happens. If you know where people go, what time they go to where it is, you can, and you have a little bit of metadata, you can predict their behavior. And this actually, the Supreme Court not that long ago ruled that police cannot use metadata, which is the digital form of flock cameras, as a fishing expedition. You cannot just select an entire area, collect all of the metadata, and then go fishing for a crime. And so what that is everywhere that you go with one of these, there's just about every single phone has a GPS chip in it. And so the phone, sometimes whether it's on or not, tracks wherever you go, and that leaves a digital trail. Now, it is used for location services, and this is another one of those things. Well, we'll keep you safe. Yeah. But again, and remember, all of us carry one of these things. But it tracks where you go, what time you go. Now, if you have that data, and if you have, and this was in the Supreme Court case, if you know when somebody called another person and who that person called, you don't actually have to record the phone call to know what they were talking about. Collection of that data is unconstitutional. Therefore, constant surveillance of a person, where they go, what time they go to the store, what time they go to the coffee shop to have coffee, what time they go pick up their kids, what time they go to work. If you have all of that data, you can determine what a person is doing, and you can establish a pattern and figure out if they are committing a crime or whatever. But the police do not get to go on an expedition to determine if you committed a crime. They don't get to just search and say, oh, there he is, running that stop sign again. They get to investigate when a crime has happened, and there's probable cause to investigate that. And so, it's a fine line. So, Linda, yeah, you're right. When you go down into a shopping mall, or you pull into the Walmart parking lot, or you're walking in the town square, you really don't have an expectation of privacy. However, If that information is used to determine whether or not you committed a crime before there's probable cause, that's a violation of your rights. Okay, so here's the Florida sheriff calling all of us that are skeptical of flock cameras ignorant and engaging in misinformation. Check this fool out.
Here in St. Johns County, we're not hearing the rhetoric that the rest of the country is actually preaching. Matter of fact, we're not really hearing the rhetoric across the great state of Florida because of our support and leadership, including the Lieutenant Governor from the great, from the Capitol in Tallahassee. But here's the one thing I say, and I've been blasting emails because I feel like it's the flavor of the day. And we'll move on to something else. But if you look at the map that was produced on the local media sources over the last couple of days, if you look at the cities that are removing flock, those are the same exact cities and the same exact states that defund the police department, turn our backs on us when one incident occurs in maybe a place like Minneapolis, and they all turn their backs on us, and the police are always bad. Listen, we hold our people accountable in the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. We've had license plate reader technology, not just flock, since 2017. When I came on as sheriff, it's on steroids now too as well, because I do not want to be that community that cannot solve crime. Again, you look at those cities, you look at those states, their crime stats are ridiculous. Why are they moving here to the great state of Florida? If you're so protected, your schools are so great, and your law enforcement is doing such a good job, why in the hell are you coming to my damn community? Well, here's
to tell us what we're doing wrong.
Well, sure, but really, it's a small percentage, Troy. I'm telling you. Yeah. I mean, I preach. What I think a little bit of it is ignorance and misinformation of what it truly is. Flock is American owned and operated outside Washington D.C. in Virginia. They don't share the information. It's mine. I own it. I choose to do what I want to do with the information, and I have chosen my information. We only share it with surrounding counties.
Yeah,
do we share it with the federal government? Yes.
So, in other words, enough of this idiot. He's calling us morons for questioning him. But so in other words, he's saying, "Oh, just trust us. We hold each other accountable. You just trust us. There won't be any abuse. We promise." Well, it is, and here's the reason why. Your constitutional rights are sacrosanct. That is, if your rights are violated when you're arrested, we're going to let the person go. Because your rights were violated. And how many cases do you hear about where, all right, so hey, I wasn't read my rights. Okay, well, you got to go. Benjamin Franklin said it is better that 100 guilty people go free than one innocent man go to prison. We have restrictions on the police to protect our constitutional rights. And do some of them hamper the ability to solve crime? Sure they do. You bet. But the reason is it is not the police's job to prevent crime. That's impossible. It is the job of the police to investigate crime. And it's and most people don't understand that. We think of the police as, hey, these guys are supposed to prevent crime and they're always going to prevent it. No, that is not the job of the cops. The job of the cops is to investigate crime and then bring those people that are either guilty of it, to determine who actually committed it, to the prosecutors, and their job is to prosecute crime. It's not to prevent it, because that, of course, is impossible. Now, a couple of comments here I want to respond to. Linda, you're right. Specific phone data requires a warrant. So if a police officer says, well, John Smith committed a crime, we want his phone data. Well, that requires a warrant, yes. But what the Supreme Court case was referring to is mass phone data. So in other words, what they do is geofence an area. So, I don't know, Carbon County. And they collect all of the phone data from that entire county and then use that data to determine if a crime was committed. That's what's unconstitutional. So a lot of this, is really, 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 really confusing. And by confusing, I don't mean you're confused. I mean, it's really difficult to determine where the line is between what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. And so, another comment from Jerry, imagine what would have happened if, and this is his comment, imagine what would have happened if we had flock cameras during COVID. What would have been done to us if all of those cameras were as pervasive as they are today? What would we have done? What would they have done to us? Hey, Dave is not wearing his mask down at the grocery store. Go get him. You don't think that would have happened? Well, the truth is, my friends, that I think that these flock cameras I think the potential for abuse is so high that, I don't think that law enforcement should be able to use that data at all. You can't use mass data to determine, and you see it all the time on, one of my favorite shows was 24, Jack Bauer. It's lovely Christine is watching. That one was for her. But in the TV show, they follow a car all the way through the traffic cameras, and they determine exactly where it goes. Those have existed for a long time. Law enforcement could use a weather camera. In Wyoming, we've got the wide-out cameras that show you what the road looks like. If you knew where a car was going, you could say, oh, okay, there's the vehicle. It went through this exit at 1042 or whatever. You could determine that. But I think that the potential for abuse is so high here that we should, I mean, you can't tell a private company what they can produce and what they can't produce, unless, of course, you're the Wyoming Business Council and they happen to be in Wyoming, in which case that's apparently totally acceptable. But I think that we significantly restrain the ability of police to use that data. And it's no different than having to read a suspect their rights. And that if you don't do that, they go free. Or if the suspect says, I want a lawyer, the conversation ends with the police and they can't continue to ask you questions. It's no different than any of those protections. We should just erect significant fences around the law enforcement's ability to use this data. And only under specific and very constrained circumstances should it be used. So anyway, I mean, I don't think that this is an easy subject, and I don't think it's one that's settled law at all, because there's still people like this idiot in Florida saying, well, yeah, we have to be able to use it to solve crime. Absolutely ridiculous. So, all right, enough about flock crimes. Oh, by the way, later on today on the Open Range Record, we're going to have a piece about flock cameras. I'm still working on it, so I'm thinking at some point today we'll have a piece on it. I sent one of our staff around to investigate. They used the map and I don't remember the website, but the map that online that shows you where all these supposed flock cameras are. I sent one of our staff around to investigate each one of those. And so the article I'm going to publish today is kind of is the result out of that little investigation. So it's pretty interesting. I'll publish it later today. Moving on to, back to the turkey vulture. And this is a piece from our pal, Mr. Harrison. It's an op-ed, and it's entitled, "The Road We Are On, A Conservative's Reckoning." All right, so before we ever begin this, flock cameras are just beat cops. No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all, because the difference is with a beat cop, they actually have to have probable cause. That is, they have to see something happen, or they pull a door open on a business that's unlocked. It's very different than collecting data ad hoc and en masse. Anyway, so here's what Harrison says. What does it mean to be free? Not free in the bumper sticker sense, free in the original demanding sense. Capable of governing yourself, providing for yourself, solving your own problems without petitioning a bureaucrat in Washington or Cheyenne. If you can look at Wyoming's 2026 and honestly say its citizens are free in that sense, nothing that follows will interest you. But if the question gives you pause, read on. Tom Lubnow, former Wyoming House Speaker, is right. Kerry Drake, veteran Wyoming political columnist, is right. I don't think so. The Freedom Caucus got too big for its britches and has no one to blame for it except for itself. Now, on that point, I think that I would agree. In many cases, I think that the policies that they enacted, I think that there were some bigger reaches than we're probably able to do. And I think you're seeing some evidence of those. However, if you look at the policies we were able to get through and signed by the governor, there were a lot of those. For example, the 25% tax reduction. That was absolutely necessary. because property taxes had risen exponentially on just about everybody in Wyoming. And, when you have a state government that is stashing hundreds of millions of dollars every year and still taxing at the same rate, that tells you that you're taxing too much. The only, anything over and above what is absolutely necessary for the essential functions of government is legalized larceny. We've known that. We've always known that. It's one of the reasons why there was such a big fight over taxation in the Constitution to begin with. How much money should the government be able to amass? And in the case of Wyoming property taxes, we were amassing a whole heck of a lot. And so, Senate File 69 was an important step. The election integrity, the changing of the crossover voting thing, which I think that it did constrain a lot of crossover voting. Now, granted, there was the media effort to get everybody to switch parties before the May 14th deadline. Okay, we kind of knew that was going to happen. But the truth is there were some good things, and I think that there were some places where they overreached. So on that point, I can agree with Harrison. Here's where I think that he is right, okay? The Freedom Caucus confused a narrow majority with a mandate, all right? Yep, they probably did. A majority in one chamber is not permission to remake the state. It's a trial period. The caucus defunded the state's economic development agency, threatened to slash $40 million from the state's university, and restructured the budget in ways that threatened services communities had organized their lives around. That part he is wrong about. Okay, so the essential services that a lot of candidates campaigned on were never in jeopardy, Fred. There was never, and Fred Harrison is his name, there was never a time when those local services were in jeopardy. How do we know that? Because the most that any county was impacted by the 25% tax reduction in Senate File 69 was roughly 6%, and that was in Sheridan County. Just about every other county, just about every other single one of them had a negligible impact to their budget, because we don't fund most things with residential property taxes. The majority of the revenue that counties use, that schools use, comes from industry, from property taxes in the oil and gas field. It doesn't come from your home. In fact, it's a really, really small percentage. I did the numbers a couple of years ago with the 50% tax reduction. And when you include that it is only on your primary residence, that you have to live here at least a year, that you have to live in the home that you're getting the exemption on for 6 months prior to the exception, it equals out to a really small number. And at the most, at a 50% tax reduction, it is a 10% cut. That's it. There is not a budget anywhere that can't sustain a 10% cut. And honestly, if you look at the amount of money that counties are giving to nonprofits, in Sheridan, it was in excess of $1 million. You could probably knock out a big percentage of that 5% or 6% or whatever it was right there. So don't tell me that any of these services were ever in jeopardy. Be honest about what you're arguing here, Fred, because that comment isn't. Okay, so everybody, during the legislative session, what we heard over and over and over and over again was, what about the poor counties? What about the hardship counties? What about Niobrara? So the cut that Niobrara had to sustain was $170,000. That's the cost of 2.5 pickups, maybe 2 pickups, 1.5 if you get the really nice version. So the point is, my friends, that's not an honest comment. All of these government services were not in jeopardy. So overreach is forgivable. What followed was not. Members accepted campaign checks from an outside lobbyist on the House floor during a session. Checkgate. That moment was out of character for people who had spent years fighting for Wyoming's integrity. Wyoming voters responded accordingly. Okay, Fred, get your facts right before you write them down. Nobody accepted a check from a lobbyist during Checkgate. No lobbyist was on the floor handing out checks. Period. Not a lobbyist. Second, That is a constitutionally protected expression of free speech. You're a lawyer. You should know that. That there was no law that was broken. There was no rule that was broken. Now, had it happened before? You bet. You can't tell me that in the crooked left-wing history of the Wyoming legislature that hadn't happened before. It absolutely had. You can't tell me that campaign checks weren't handed out like bubble gum at a baseball game in that Capitol building. The only difference here is that there was a picture taken. That's the difference. Now, no law was broken. No rule was broken. It's constitutionally protected. And so the only question is, what happened afterwards? Now, that's unfortunate. With the media's help, the left turned it into something that it wasn't. And you, sir, as a lawyer, should know that. Now, did it look bad? Yep, I'll give it to you. Did I hammer my business partner about it? Yep, sure did. But she didn't break any law. She didn't break a rule. Not at all. In fact, what she did was constitutionally protected. And it's nothing that hadn't happened in that Capitol building before. Period. Now, he goes on. The critics are right about the failure. They are wrong about what it means. Okay, now here maybe we can get back on the page with Mr. Harrison. But before this conservative joins the chorus, let the record show that the Freedom Caucus, what they delivered, a 25% residential property tax exemption, real money returned to real families, expanded school choice because of a government monopoly on education is a bug in a free society, not a feature. Repealed gun-free zones because they read the Second Amendment as written. Proof of citizenship to vote because the integrity of the franchise is foundational. There were not acts of extremists. They were acts of the people who took their oaths seriously. Now look at the actual numbers. Barlow won the Republican gubernatorial primary with 44% of the vote. His two consecutive opponents combined for 54.3%. The majority chose a conservative. They didn't get one. They got Eric Barlow. The same pattern repeated in the Secretary of State's race. This was not a rejection of conservatism. It was a conservatism divided and conquered. Come November, those voters will vote for Barlow as the lesser evil. They will win the office. They will not have won the governorship. That distinction will define Wyoming for the next 4 years. Edmund Burke, I hope that's not right, though I think it is a steep hill to climb to defeat Eric Barlow. Edmund Burke observed that the people never give up their liberties, but under some delusion. Wyoming voters on August 18th were under no delusion about the Freedom Caucus. I think they were. But there is a deeper delusion, one that predates this election and will outlast it. The comfortable belief that Wyoming is not already far down the road towards the tyranny of an all-powerful state. Hayek called this the road to serfdom. Not tyranny imposed by force, something far more dangerous. The slow, voluntary surrender of freedom by people who found dependency more comfortable than governance. The road to serfdom is not a cliff. It's a gentle, well-maintained slope that the people on it rarely notice that they are descending. Look at Wyoming on that slope. Honestly, without the mythology. Approximately 45% of the state revenue derives from federal sources. Government employment accounts for 1 in 5 Wyoming workers, a constituency for limited government that shrinks with every hiring cycle. The University of Wyoming has drifted from serving Wyoming's culture to importing ideological fashions it has no business emulating. Our health department expands its budget and authority while the health of Wyoming's people worsens. Every agency that fails its mission and is rewarded with a larger budget teaches the lesson that Hayek warned about. The state, once invited in, does not leave. A Republican who votes for government growth endangers Wyoming's freedom just as surely as any Democrat. The threat does not arrive wearing a donkey pin. It arrives with a budget line item approved by a Republican legislator, signed by a Republican governor, and celebrated as responsible governance. If Eric Barlow's administration guarantees the bureaucracy remains in charge, agencies grow, dependencies deepen, hard questions go unasked. The Freedom Caucus will have been defeated, but not refuted. There's a difference, and it matters enormously. Now, that part I can agree with. Because, and I wrote an op-ed on the Open Range Record, essentially to this point, that we didn't vote for rugged individualism. We didn't vote for to be self-dependent. We voted for dependency because just about every person that won campaigned on it. Healthcare that meets us where we are. Micah Sturdivant, who, by the way, both of those people, Sturdivant and there's a whole list of them, Sturdivant, Koltiska, Butcher, they've all been invited on this program. And none of them returned an email. Shows you how interested they are in speaking to Wyoming conservatives. But the truth is, my friends, that we did vote for dependency, and we voted for it en masse. And I say the collective we, not you and me, because I don't think it's too early to say that don't blame me, I didn't vote for Eric Barlow. We're going to take one more break, and we'll continue with the program when we come back. Open Line Friday, 307-374-8989. The calendar says that it's summer, and you believe it. Well, that's just so cute. But you obviously haven't lived here very long, have you? And you probably think that the weather is just going to continue to warm up. You don't have to worry about snow or ice or 30-degree temperatures anymore. In case you've forgotten, this is Wyoming, my friend, and that sort of thinking doesn't work here. 1 minute, it could be 75 and sunny, and 10 minutes later, snow. Whatever the weather, you need a pair of socks that'll keep your feet cool and dry even on the hottest of summer days. And if you happen to run into that freak midsummer snowstorm, trust me, it's happened. I've seen it. You'll stay nice and toasty warm. Well, your feet anyway. To get you a pair, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. These are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia, Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada. Straight to hell. Iceland. France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the last year and a half been more than you could bear? Well, if it has, you've come to the right place. Call my friend Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy State Politics. The podcast, Cowboy State Politics Live, this program, and the Open Range Record. The big voice on Wyoming's right. Welcome back to the program, my friends. I'm your host, David Iverson, doing what I was born to do with talent given to me by God himself. Welcome back to the show, my friends. Thank you for joining me on a Friday. You know, Fridays, well, I mean, I enjoy every day on the program, but this one today is by far my favorite. So if you want to be part of the show, the phone number is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. Now that I've gone after Harrison's column, let me come to his defense. Not that he really needs my defense. And see, this is where we have a significant problem in Wyoming's politics. That is, we have 2-3 groups of people who, in many cases, talk past each other. It's not that conservatives are unwilling to talk to Democrats and liberals and redcoats. It's not that we're unwilling to talk. It's that we're speaking 3 different languages. Well, actually two, because the redcoats speak the Democrat language, because there's no difference between them. The Democrats, the redcoats, they have, they believe that the word compromise means do it our way. And that's typically what Republicans do, to get the word compromise into the conversation. We just submit everything that we want, or we just, toss away everything we want, and the Democrats let us put our name on it. That's what they mean by compromise. And, to some degree, conservatives in the last legislature kind of did that same sort of thing, but we're not talking the same language, and we're not able to sit down and discuss because one side is not being honest brokers. Here's how you know that. Pull out, I'm sure some of you still have some of those ridiculously voluminous campaign mailings available to you. If not, let me know. I've got well over 100 of them. I can show you a couple of them. Most of them probably have the word conservative emblazoned on them. Most people that won in the 2026 primary claim to be a conservative when they are not. And so they were able, with the help of many, many well-funded political action committees, don't buy the lie that the conservatives spent a whole heck of a lot more money than the liberals did. That's not true. After the final FEC filing, which I cannot wait to see, we're going to find out. But it's a huge amount of money. In many cases, like Agent 29, I think I counted like 14 mailings to his 5. So, I mean, way, way outgunned. But here is a piece, and it's published in the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, the Tribune Eagle. It's entitled, Fred Harrison's latest column should never have been published in the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. Now, this is written by Patricia McDaniel. Remember that name. Remember Patricia McDaniel. Let's get to what she says first. She says, Harrison's column on the 21st of August may be the most misogynistic opinion piece that editors have ever published. It is better suited for publication on some dark web incel website. Mr. Harrison maintains that the women's movement, and thereby all women, he didn't say that, is responsible for what he calls the hookup culture and a remarkable suspension of moral reasoning on the part of women, robbing them of the dignity and ability to govern themselves. In other words, Mr. Harrison implies that women, without the wisdom of fathers, husbands, and men in general, he didn't make that claim either, are unable to control themselves or their bodies and are responsible for this for every social ill facing this state. Welcome to the 1950s. That wasn't his argument at all. In fact, Harrison's argument was that traditional feminism created the hookup culture. That is, the rejection of the traditional family, the rejection of marriage as an American institution. That's what he was referring to. When you deviate from that, all sorts of things happen that the hookup culture easily begins to take hold. And that is that, you don't have to worry about marriage, just sleep with whomever you want. That if you get pregnant, don't worry about it. You just abort the baby. But the two go hand in hand, and there could be no question, at least in my mind, that the feminist movement was the genesis of a lot of this thinking. Now, she ends this by saying he claims rates of depression and social isolation among young women have risen in every decade since liberation. While offering no factual evidence to support this outrageous claim, even by Mr. Harrison's extremist positions, this is a new low of an undeserved put down of women everywhere. He didn't do that, not at all. He was remarking on the culture as it exists today and offering a possible cause of it. That being, generally speaking, feminism. Around 9 in 10 Republicans and Republican-leaning independents and Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents favor preventing people with mental illness from buying guns. Where did that come from? Well, you see, Patricia McDaniel is the wife of Roger McDaniel. Roger McDaniel was a very liberal legislator in the 1980s. He was, for a very long time, he may very well still be, the pastor of a Presbyterian church. So he's a pastor, former legislator, very, very liberal. In fact, he wrote a recent column, perhaps one of his last ones, that said that he is done being a Republican in name only, and he went back to the Democrat Party. He's always been a longtime Democrat. Now, remember, Roger McDaniel, Patricia McDaniel's husband, that is the husband of the lady that wrote this. Excuse me, I didn't mean to misuse the word lady. But this is the family that we're talking about here. Now, let me just read to you a couple of pieces from from Roger McDaniel's. Maybe we could call them operatic. No. Transcendental. No. Epistemologically confused. Yes, perhaps that's true. But he published some of his sermons on a blog entitled Blowing in the Wyoming Wind. Let me read you the first one here. And I quote, let's see here. Now, this is a sermon that he delivered behind the pulpit in his Presbyterian church. Quote, according to the Pew Research Center, the share of Americans saying gun laws should be stricter increased from 52% in 2017 to 60% this year. What's more, there are several proposals on which Republicans and Democrats agree. Around 9 in 10 Republicans, listen to this claim, and Republican-leaning independents and Democrats and Democrat-leaning independents favor preventing people with mental illnesses from buying guns. Well, that's already the law, Roger. And let's think about the statistics that he throws out there. That we should have stricter gun laws. He's claiming that 60% of people believe that. I don't think that's true at all. In fact, I think that if you polled Wyoming on if we should have any more gun restrictions, you'd come up with a number significantly lower than that 60. I would be surprised if it was 25%. But think about this. This is what he delivered from behind the pulpit. Let me give you another one. So again, you can look this up. Roger McDaniel, I think it's called Blowing in the Wyoming Wind. It's a blog, and he published some of his sermons on it. And probably after this program, he'll delete the blog. But anyway, it's worth it for today. Here's another piece. And large majorities of both Democrats, 93%, and Republicans, 82%, favor background checks for private gun sales and sales at gun shows. So his claim is that 82% of Republicans believe that we should have gun checks. Well, first of all, there is no gun loophole. Okay, so to buy a weapon, you have to fill out the form, which, by the way, is unconstitutional. The Second Amendment does not say you have the right to keep and bear arms if the government agrees with you. It says you have the right to keep and bear arms, period. There is no exception in it, no matter what Roger McDaniel has to say. He goes on, 72% of women want assault weapons banned, as do 57% of all voters. More than 60% favor red flag gun laws, and 57% want owners to be licensed. And since it is Martin Luther King Jr.'s anniversary of his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, here is something else that he wrote. This is Roger McDaniel, Patricia McDaniel's husband, that wrote this stupid op-ed claiming that Fred Harrison hates women. Listen to this. Again, this is from behind his pulpit. Quote, we're going to have that conversation in order that we might discern God's will. And on Martin Luther King's birthday next January, we're going to take a congregational vote on whether we should do it. And if we determine it is God's will, we will set out to encourage other Presbyterians and other Jesus followers to do the same thing. And we're going to face how we benefit from the worst of our history and have a conversation of how we need to cleanse ourselves of it as much as those 10 lepers need to be cleansed. Here's the kicker. Like that 10th leper, we'll find our way back to Christ, where we can genuinely and in deep gratitude witness to God's reconciliation. You see, it's pretty hard to do that honestly while standing on stolen land and clinging to our white privilege. Amen. That's how he ended a sermon. That you're clinging to your white privilege. So, I don't think that you should pay any attention to Patricia McDaniel's op-ed, nor do I think that it's even a valid attack on Fred Harrison's column, considering who Patricia McDaniel is and who Roger McDaniel is. Now, all that being said, and I firmly believe, I mean, all you got to do is read her letter to the editor and you've got this. But anyway, just because one spouse believes one way doesn't necessarily mean that the other believes the same. One good example, Kellyanne Conway and George Conway. When Kellyanne was the counselor to President Trump, George Conway was running the Never Trump Lincoln projects. And the two, well, they're now divorced, but the two were married then. So doesn't necessarily mean that. It's just that we got plenty of evidence to support it. Those two characters, man, thinking along the same lines. Hey, Roger, Patricia, why don't you go examine your white privilege and leave leave the rest of us the heck alone? I think that would be a good idea. All right, some other stuff. This is interesting. I found this one this morning. The U.S. military has used lasers to shoot down 3 cartel drones at the southern border, says the Pentagon. So, I mean, you knew that you knew that technology was advancing to a point where we could do this. It's just, I think it's fascinating that we actually did. And I quote, now this is from CBS News, by the way. The U.S. military this week used a laser to shoot down 3 drones along the U.S.-Mexico border that were allegedly operated by drug cartels. The 3 unmanned aircraft systems were shot down late Tuesday night and early Wednesday morning using an, quote, Army multipurpose high-energy laser system, according to the U.S. Northern Command, which is responsible for overseeing certain military defense operations in North America. The drones were downed by the U.S. military Southern Task Force, a unit of U.S. Northcom, which did not specify exactly where the drones were shot down. Asked if the drones were shot down, let's see here. I'm trying to see. I guess it doesn't say, tell us too much about the laser, except that, pretty cool, we're now shooting stuff down with lasers. I think it's amazing, absolutely fascinating, if you ask me. Okay, what's this one? Oh yeah, okay. So all right, y'all know that I'm a history nut, and my hero is George Washington, not because he was the first president, but because he is the standard by which all other presidents are judged. That he is and was the indispensable man, the father of the Constitution, the guy who set the standard by which presidents served 2 terms, and only one of them violated that. That'd be the left's hero, FDR, who you talk about a guy that you might think was a hero that turned out to be an absolute villain. It's him. But him and Woodrow Wilson. I hate that guy. But here, this one says, poll pits Trump against Reagan and Lincoln, and the results are shocking. And I quote, I think I found this on Breitbart. The president has posted a short video about this poll on his Truth Social account. All right, whatever. President Donald Trump is touting a poll showing that he is more admired than other legendary Republican presidents. The president posted a video of CNN's analyst Harry Enton covering the poll and showing that 53% of Republican respondents said they admired Trump more than Reagan and more than Abraham Lincoln. Trump's still the sun around which the GOP revolves. Only 18% of Republicans said in the CNN poll that they admired Reagan most, while a paltry 8% said they admired Lincoln most. Let's see here. Enton used the poll to explain why Trump endorsed Darlene Graham Norton, won the Republican primary runoff for one of 2 of South Carolina's U.S. Senate seats. Trump's endorsees for the Senate have won 100% of the time in 2026, he added. He pulled Graham, who had a little shot pre-endorsement, over the finish line. Enton pointed out that a separate Elon University poll found 29% of Republicans said Trump was the best president in history. He went on to show that New York City Democrat Zoran Mondani had grown his national support and now is the most positive net favorability among Democrats. Of course he is. Many polls have reported that the president's favorability has suffered after the prolonged military operation in Iran and had some of its economic fallout. Okay, so there's a couple of things going on here. First, people tend to favor that which is most familiar to them. And one of the reasons why, in the poll, I think, that people favored Trump is, well, he's the Republican in office now, and he's got enormous popularity. But when you look at his contribution to the country, One, I don't think it's over. Two, he's had an enormous contribution to righting the ship that is America. That is, we went through 8 years of Barack Obama. We went through 4 years of Otto Penn, which we might argue that that was also Barack Obama. So that's the most familiar. And people generally, I mean, if you're a fan of the president, well, you're going to look at that and say, well, yeah, I mean, he's the guy that's in office now and he's doing great. And I think that a lot of his accomplishments, certainly with where the economy is concerned. And I know, okay, so you're paying $4.50, well, I don't know, hopefully it's $4.30. I think that's what it was yesterday, but you're paying a high price for gas right now. Inflation's kind of high. But that's because you got a war in the Middle East going on. We can argue that, I've heard a lot of Democrats say, well, there's no end to this war in sight. Well, Trump's the first president willing to confront Iran since probably maybe Thomas Jefferson. Of course, Jefferson, he was fighting the pirates in Libya, on the shores of Tripoli. That's, the Marine Corps theme song. But to put him up against Lincoln was president during the Civil War. Now, again, there are positives and negatives with every president. If you want to look at a guy who trampled the Constitution, you got to say it's President Lincoln. He wanted to suspend habeas corpus during the Civil War. But he's the man that wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay. And what about Reagan? Reagan did a lot of awesome stuff. I mean, he rescued the economy from the clutches of Jimmy Carter. Oh my God. Where we had gas lines, where we had a president stand, he was in the Oval Office and said there's a malaise in the country. I love Ronald Reagan. Ronaldus Magnus, who, made conservatism mainstream. Pretty incredible. But I seriously don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that either one of those, Reagan or Trump, holds a candle to, say, Thomas Jefferson. Okay, now you might say, "Oh, David, you're just biased because it's the founding fathers and you're a history nut." Well, okay, that's true. But Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and if you read his first draft, pretty much the whole thing was by Jefferson's hand. Of course, they deleted some sections in it. And I don't think that they hold a candle to George Washington, the indispensable man. Did you know that during his second election, that people did not refer to him as President Washington. They referred to him as General Washington. And in fact, pretty much everywhere that Washington went, they referred to him as Mr. President. But in passing, it was General Washington. Even his campaign buttons, which, man, I would love to have one of those if I had enough money. But he was the guy that stepped down after 2 terms as president. I mean, he's the guy that after the Revolutionary War said, "Okay, I'm going back to my farm, and I'm done. I'm going to go back to my wife and my farm, and that's it." And it was the delegates to the Constitutional Convention that rode to his house and convinced him to come to the convention. In fact, he slammed the door in their face, and he said and he wrote, "Have I not done enough for my country?" And then after they left, he went and got on his horse and he rode to Philadelphia. George Washington, in my mind, is the standard by which all others will be judged. All you got to do is read his writings to find out what kind of a man he was. And Jefferson would probably be number 2 on my list. Number 3 would be Lincoln. Number 4 would probably be Reagan. And I think number 5 would probably be President Trump. But that's pretty good company, Mr. President, to be compared with some of the most incredible men in America's history. So don't think I'm getting down on the president. I'm not. I'm just saying that he's not exactly number 1 in my mind. That's GW. Okay, so let's see here. We got about 10 minutes left, and not that, we don't do a lot of, cultural news on this program. for good reason. One, I think it's kind of a distraction, but two, a lot of it kind of makes me sick sometimes. But anyway, any of you friends with Jelly Roll? Yeah, that's the name the guy goes by. The dude with the face tattoos and all of him. Yeah, well, he's about to find out what happened to the Dixie Chicks. You remember them when they came out publicly against George W. Bush and their popularity went into the tank and pretty much never returned? Well, that's about to happen to him. From the Daily Caller, Jelly Roll doubles down on savage attack against Donald Trump. Just one day after calling President Trump a fat pig, Jelly Roll doubled down on his remarks. The famous singer stepped in as guest host of Tuesday's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live and refused to back down amid backlash over comments he made Monday on the very same stage. Quote, "Now, let's just be honest for a second. Any U.S. president should be able to handle a few jokes, right?" he told the audience. Determined not to walk back his stance, he continued, "They should also be able to handle gas prices, healthcare, and occasional international conflict, but beggars can't be choosers." Trump supporters were angered when the country music star took aim at Trump's weight and appearance Monday. Making the reference to his 300-pound weight loss, Jelly Roll said, "That means I've lost an entire Donald Trump." Then he unleashed on the president by saying, "From one fat pig to another, take it from me, the physical fitness is very important. Trust me, you'll be happy to see your bleep again." My friends, now, we have the freedom of speech in this country, but you also have the freedom to accept the consequences of the things that you say, and definitely the things that you do. And old Jelly Roll, pal, you're about to find out why the Dixie Chicks are not popular anymore. Trump supporters are and I think they absolutely have the record for being active in the market and not buying the bull crap that celebrities and companies are trying to shove down our throats. I got to tell you, my man, you are about to find out how influential conservatives are when they stop buying your crap. It's about to happen. Well, my friends, yes, and I'm glad you said that, Patrick. You also have the freedom of stupidity. Jelly Roll, man, that's exactly what you got. You got the freedom to say anything that you want. You also have the freedom to be as stupid as you want, but you also have the freedom to accept the consequences of all of those things. Well, my friends, thank you for another busy broadcast week on the program. It's been a riot. Again, I can't tell you how big of a place you guys take up in my heart. And if you have any doubt, get a hold of the lovely Christine, and she will tell you. But thank you for watching, my friends. That'll do it for another busy broadcast, 2 hours. Well, not exactly 2 hours, but pretty darn close of the program. Have a great weekend. Don't miss Weekend Update tomorrow from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio. I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you later, my friends. Have a great weekend. Can't wait to see you.